The play on the field, the courts, and the ice is just one part of sports. Behind every game are the people hard at work so we can enjoy the action. They're the owners, administrators, agents, broadcasters, and promoters who bring the games to life. Meet them when you go behind the game with Patrick Klinger and Bill Robertson.
Welcome to another episode of Behind the Game. I'm Patrick Klinger, and back to my left after a brief hiatus is the Commissioner of the Western Collegiate Hockey Association, my good friend and future member of the Mancini's Restaurant Hall of Fame, Bill Robertson. Billy, welcome back.
Thanks, Patrick. It's great to be back. Our special guest today is a 43-year veteran of the St. Paul Pioneer Press as a sports writer, 16-time Sports Writer of the Year in the state of Minnesota, a former Major League pitcher from the Minnesota Twins, Charley Shooter Walters. Welcome.
Thanks, guys. Nice to be with my two good buddies, Billy and Patrick. Thanks. Nice to be here.
Well, this is like sitting outside at a country club or a restaurant, and we'll make it very easy for you today, Charley.
You can make it as tough as you want, Billy. you and Patrick are pretty tough customers.
All right. That's good. So I'm going to start the questions with something for you. You have been stated as saying that there were two things that you wanted to do in your life, and one was to be a newspaper person and one a Major League Baseball player. Most young boys grow up saying, I want to be a baseball player like I did and Patrick did. What was the attraction for you at a young age about the newspaper business?
Well, I'll tell you, but how did you do it with that baseball dream?
I went to a couple of tryout camps, and they did not go as well as they did for
Once
you.
you got the tryout camp.
Yes.
I don't know, Patrick, you want to be a baseball player?
Well, I did until I was about 12, and I realized that that was not going to be in the cards for me, Charlie. I had no athletic ability whatsoever.
Oh, was it your hitting or your speed?
Yeah, all of the above.
Well, anyway, yes, to answer your question, Bill, when I was a kid, I was probably 6th or 7th. To back up, my mom and dad were newspaper nuts. Every morning, newspaper on the counter. My mom and dad have coffee and some donuts, and they read the newspapers all the time. So every day I got up as a kid, there were newspapers there. It was the Minneapolis newspaper, the Minneapolis Tribune. And I just would read it when they were finished with it. I loved it. I loved finding out what was going on. And then one Christmas, my mom and dad for Christmas under the tree is a little typewriter. And I have a real typewriter, but a smaller one. And I have three brothers and a sister, and we have a whole bunch of kids where I grew up in Northeast Minneapolis at a place called Waite Park. And we would play all summer long. In fact, spring, summer, and fall, we play these baseball games. And we were just kids, 6th, 7th grade, 8th grade. And then we'd play these games. And at the end of the games, I would type out on my little typewriter, carbon paper, typewriting. I go down to 5 and 10 down about 4 or 5 blocks away on Johnson Street, and I type out the results of the games. So I got a stencil. I call it the neighborhood news. The next morning, I'd have my brothers and my sister deliver them in the neighbors' front doors that were open, not the door, but the screen door, and drop in my little newspaper. And it was the neighborhood news. So to answer your question, yeah, I always wanted to be two things. I wanted to be a newspaper guy, and I wanted to be like so many others, a big league baseball player and a pitcher, and pretty lucky got to do both.
And that carried on into high school because while you were setting records in baseball and basketball at Edison High School, you were still writing for the...
I was also the sports editor of the Edison Record was the name of and was lucky enough to win a couple of state writing awards, the Minnesota High School Journalism Association, or whatever they call it. And so that was encouraging, and so I just kept going. Then baseball happened as an 18-year-old. And then you play baseball and you go to the minor leagues, and then I come back, and at the end of the season I try and get in a quarter or two at school. And then I played 4 seasons of winter baseball, so it was almost around the clock, so I couldn't go to school then, but eventually I got enough quarters to progress. And then when I decided not to continue baseball because I didn't like the minor league contract I got, I went back to university full-time, got my degree, and as you guys mentioned earlier, 8 days after I was hired, I was hired 8 days after I graduated from the University of Minnesota at the St. Paul paper, and it's 43 years later, and here we are.
It's an amazing career.
Well, it's fun. It's been fun. Pretty fortunate.
Let's go back to this whole idea of the tryout camp. You were one of only 4 players in Twins history to make it to the big leagues from Minnesota Twins tryout camp. And if I remember right, that was at the old Metropolitan Stadium in Bloomington. And you didn't really want to go at first, and
Yeah,
your
what
dad
happened?
kind of pushed you?
Yeah, my dad was a janitor at Edison High School, where I went to high school, and he was a popular guy. And there was an assistant principal at Edison by the name of Hal Younghands, and he had played in the Dodgers system, and he was a scout, part-time, or had been a scout for the Dodgers, besides being our assistant principal. And the Twins, as you know, you tried out there once or twice, I think.
Yes.
And it was a 2-day camp, and I wouldn't dare go out to that baseball camp because I didn't have enough confidence that I wasn't skilled enough to do that. And we got a call about 9:30, 10 at night from Hal Younghands, assistant principal at Edison High School. And he called me and said, Charlie, the Twins are having a tryout camp. I know Angie Giuliani, who you know, and Patrick, and why don't you go out to that tryout camp? And I said, Mr. Younghands, I'm just not ready for that kind of thing. There were 250, 300 kids out there, and they're all pretty good. The Gophers had a lot of players out there, and kids I had watched. And although I did well in high school, I never had that sort of that sort of confidence that I could do that. So he said, go on out tomorrow. And I said, no, I'm not going to. Thanks anyway. And for the call. And then I hung up the phone, and my dad was in the living room reading the newspaper. And he said, who's that from, that call? And I said, that's Mr. Younghands calling. What do you want? Well, he asked me if he suggested I go out to the Twins tryout camp at Metropolitan Stadium the second day of the camp. And my dad said, if he's nice enough to call you and ask you to do that, then you do it for Hal. I went out there and I was throwing BBs all of a sudden. And the guy behind home plate, I can't remember his name. He was Kelvin's brother-in-law. Asked me if I wanted to, after about an hour and a half of trying out, asked me if I wanted to play minor league baseball, professional baseball, and I said yeah. And so he said, okay, we'll have a contract in the mail for you. And a week later, a contract arrives in the mail for $400 a month to go to a place called Thomasville, North Carolina, as an 18-year-old. And then a week later, a check arrives in the mail, signed by Calvin Griffith, for $100, and it says, bonus payment paid in full. And I showed it to my dad when he came home. I said, look, Dad, I got this check. And he said, well, did the Twins say anything to you about a bonus? And I said, no, it was going to be $400 a month. And my dad said, well, they probably made a mistake, Charlie, on this bonus thing. Why don't you keep it for a few weeks? If you don't hear anything, then you can spend it. So I think I blew it at the state fair, something like that one day. But that's the way it happened. And it was funny because as a tryout camp, just at a lark going out there, my dad let me use his car. 3 years later, I'm in the major leagues pitching in Anaheim against the Angels and Oakland and all this other stuff. It's a crazy world.
And Charlie, speaking of the big leagues, last week was the 50th anniversary of your debut in Major League Baseball.
Yeah, you guys are pretty good reporters. Remember that?
Yeah. Tell us what you remember of that day. I would expect that that's probably seared in your memory.
Yeah, it's too good to. It's really just the older you get, the more you realize and appreciate that moment. But it was I remember getting in the little cart that they had from right field at Anaheim. I remember the first guy I faced was Bobby Knopp. I don't know if you guys remember him. And he hit a 2-hop ground ball. First guy I faced hits a 2-hopper to our shortstop, Leo Chico Cardenas. Leo never made an error. I think he led the American League in errors, in no errors for a bunch of years. 2-hopper to Leo, and it pops out of his glove. So I got a guy in for. I remember that like it was yesterday, and it pops out. I got a runner at first and no outs, and I thought, oh gosh. But then I threw a couple of scoreless innings. My first 5 games were scoreless innings. So I'm gonna tell you about a thrill going back to that tryout camp. Not the tryout camp, but to spring training 3 years later. And Billy Martin is our manager, and I'm in right field. and it's batting practice, and Billy comes out to right field, and it's even hard for me to talk about it, but he says, Charlie, go call your parents. You made the club 25-man roster. And I'm running past first base, and Rich Reese is the first baseman, Pee Wee we called him, and he says they're going to try and get you to sign a two-way contract. Charlie, don't do it. And I said, I don't have a lot of leverage here, Pee Wee, but it was a $10,000 contract, a major league minimum, and I went in to see Calvin, and he said, sign here, and I said, oh boy, and I still got the contract, copy of the contract, and but Reese had told me, make them give you a one-way deal, because if you go to the minors, they're going to cut it in half, and I said, I don't have that bargaining power, that leverage, so I went in there, signed it. Month and a half later, I'm in the minor leagues, and I get that first paycheck. It's Reese, just like Reese said, it was cut in half. So, but that's the way it goes. It was a thrill to be in there, and as I said, every month it seems I get older, I appreciate more and more that opportunity, or it gets bigger and bigger, that moment, and it's a big deal. And then a month and a half later, I'm in the. I'll tell you what happened too. After a month and a half, we had an equipment when we get home, and you guys remember Tom Mee, who's a media relations, a wonderful guy. We get back from Orlando, and we arrive for a workout at Metropolitan Stadium, and Tom Mee, the media relations guy and public relations guy, he says, gets us all together, and he says, the Ford company has given each of you guys a brand new Ford, 1969 Ford, and he gave me a list of these cars, and he said, what would you like? And I said, well, what's left, blah, blah. And there was a nice new Mustang and that, a convertible. And there's a car called a Grand Torino, or a Torino, bright red, shiny, brand new Ford Torino. He said, it's yours. We finished the workout. We went out, and for each player in the parking lot had their brand new car for them to drive, courtesy of the Ford company. So I'm driving this thing, and my mom and dad's parked it out in front of my mom and dad's home in northeast Minneapolis. For the month and a half I was there. Then Billy comes in one day. I just pitched against the Baltimore Orioles, my last big league game, and he says, Charlie, we're going to send you to minor leagues and work on our breaking ball and all that stuff, which is fine with me. I figured I'd come back and be back before long in the big leagues. Well, the thing that really bothered me most is I was going to have to go and tell my parents that because they were getting as bigger a hoot than I was about being in the big leagues, hometown and all that stuff, and so I was thinking, how am I going to tell my mom and dad this is going to be hard? But Ray Crump, the equipment manager, after Billy walked out there, taps me on the shoulder and says, I turn around and said, what do you want, Ray? And he says, give me the keys to the Torino. I thought, boy, does this end in a hurry? I said, Ray, I have to go to Charlotte in the morning. I have to go to the airport. Can I drive the car? I need to drive a car. Then I leave it off then at the ballpark and take a cab to it. So it does. Then when you really realize what a business sports is, and you guys know that, but that's how it all ended in a hurry.
You've played with so many great players, or played against, and I think back when you were on the Twins roster, Billy Martin was the manager, and then you had players like Harmon Killebrew, Hall of Famer. You had Rod Carew, who was a Hall of Famer. Bert Blyleven.
I didn't play with Bly, but it was really funny you mentioned that, Billy, because I was thinking about this just a couple days ago. I played with a teammate of Harmon Killebrew, Hall of Famer, as you said, Rod Carew, Hall of Famer, Blyleven. We played together in the minors, a Hall of Famer, and two guys who should be, and I played with Tony Oliva and
Jim Cott.
Jim Cott, who should be in the Hall of Famer. I was thinking, gosh, I got a chance to play. I expect Tony will go in when they vote on it in December, and I think Cott still has a chance. He was only a couple of votes short last time. So I was thinking, that's pretty neat. I got a chance to play, if that happens, 5 Hall of Famers as teammates.
And just to go one step further, you are a huge supporter, or you were a Billy Martin, if I remember right, and because he wanted you on the roster. And if we can talk about this for a second, Calvin wanted to send you down, but Billy wanted to keep you on the big league roster. Is that correct?
No, what happened was we had a farm director by the name of George Brophy, who you guys I'm sure remember, and Brof wanted to send me to AA Charlotte, and Billy, because and Billy got upset because Denver was a Twins AAA club there, and they had a guy named Red Ruffing, who I think is a Hall of Fame pitcher. and he was a pitching coach there, and Billy just really got upset because he thought, how is he, and I read the papers, and he said in the papers, how is he good enough to just about to pitch in the major leagues, but not at AAA? And he said at AAA we have a pitching coach, but we didn't have a pitching coach at Charlotte. And Billy exploded, and it led toward his demise, his firing at the end of the season. I got traded to the Washington Senators right after Billy got fired. But that was a big deal, and that's the way it goes. But he was really upset, and he was so loyal. You know, he told me before it happened, he said, I'm going in to see Kelvin now, and this could cost me my job. That's exactly what he told me in the clubhouse after he told me I was going down. And it contributed to him losing his job. He was a great guy, great manager, should be in the Hall of Fame as far as I'm concerned. And I'll tell you another story about Billy. We had two pitching coaches. Early when we called him Gus and Art Fowler. And Billy we had a team meeting after we arrived at Metropolitan Stadium, and he went over all the rules he had, curfew and all this stuff, the fines and everything. If you do these things, and if you're not in on time and all that stuff. So he left the room, and Art Fowler, one of our pitching coaches, gets up in front of us all, and he says, all right, I know all you guys don't agree with what Billy says or how he runs things, but let me tell you this. Do everything he says, because if we do everything he says, he's going to make us all a lot of money. And I even got part of that. We won the division championship then, and I think I got some playoff money too. But I love Billy Martin. It was one of the saddest days ever, when December 25th, I think, or 24th, when we heard he got killed in a car accident. He was just terrific, and a great guy that you guys played. The kind of guy that you'd want to play for. That great a competitor, and loyal and everything else.
So Charlie, you make the transition from playing baseball to now covering it.
Yeah.
How did it feel to be teammates with guys, and then a few years later you're reporting on them, and did you find that it provided you any advantages, or maybe were there disadvantages of being a former player stepping into a clubhouse?
The only advantages, Patrick, were that I know what it's like for them to be in there. But my mentality was that now I'm a newspaper guy. I'm no longer a player, and so I'm a newspaper guy. I've never told anybody, when I've covered these guys in the major leagues for decades, I've never told a single player that who I'm talking to that I played in the big leagues too, for this organization, the Twins and so on. I remember Tony Oliva last year grabbed me and took me over to Miguel Sano and Byron Buxton, as unsolicited, of course, but took me over and he grabbed me by the arm and he said, hey, you guys come here. This guy pitched in the big leagues. He threw BBs, and Sano goes, what? And Buxton the same way, That was nice of Tony to do that, but I'm just a newspaper guy and a former player, but that doesn't count in my business. I'm trying to be the best newspaper guy, reporter, columnist, and all that stuff I can be, and I don't think that, I don't for a moment try and take advantage, or if there is any, of telling somebody that I played the game.
Was there ever a time, Charlie, when you had to sit on a story because you didn't want to hurt someone's?
No, never. I've never done that. I felt pretty bad about having to report some stuff that of friends. I remember. Well, I don't want to get into that. I'll tell you a little bit about it. Just as I remember, Harmon Killebrews had a son who got in trouble, and the office, because I knew Harmon, asked me to track down Harmon and call him and ask him about that, and that was really tough to do. And but otherwise, I'm just pretty straightforward. I find a way to massage things. If a guy, the news is foremost with me, and if there are different ways to ask things to try and get it. And get the news, and ultimately, if nobody will say anything, then you say they declined, no comment, that kind of thing. But I'm a newspaper guy all the way through, and I don't hold back things.
Charlie, you and Sid Hartman from the Minneapolis Star Tribune have long been considered rivals. Your columns are somewhat similar. Have you ever felt pressure to compete against Sid
No.
for scoops?
No, I never looked at competing against Sid. I looked at competing against myself, and I'm glad you asked that, Patrick, because when I was writing 4 and 5 columns a week, I would get both papers. I couldn't wait to get them in the morning. St. Paul Pioneer Press, Dispatch when we had an afternoon paper, the Minneapolis Star Tribune, and both papers when it was a Star, and this is early in the morning. As soon as they arrived, and I'd get them and I'd hold them up and I read them both, and it's just like a big scorecard for me. And I can say that day, well, I won with my column, beating whoever else happened to be writing that sort of thing. We won as a newspaper, as a sports section, and it's every day. And I looked at them as a scorecard, and it was really good to know that you won most of them. And that's the way I viewed things. I never viewed Sid as anything. But I view me against them, and that's fun. And that's one of the great things, that transition about having played all those years, and then you still get to compete, to play at the highest level. You obviously have to be a terrific competitor. You want to win. You have to win. And then I took that right to the newspaper thing, and I have to win there too. I give it everything I got, and to this day, I wait till my deadline on Saturday. They'll go up to the last minute in case somebody's calling or I need to get something. Every column I write is the best I could do every day, and that's been the way it's been for 43 years in the business. And that's fun, and I think I've won most of them.
You've been a beat writer.
Yep.
And you're a columnist. You covered day-to-day high school sports, day-to-day as a beat writer.
Yeah.
Then you covered.
Well, covered them like it was the World Series.
When you covered the Vikings and the Twins as a beat writer.
Yep.
And then you've been a columnist covering everything and anything.
Yep.
Which do you like better and why?
I like the columnist thing because I can write whatever I think is newsy, and I follow the news all the time. And whatever's newsy, I try to beat the other people with it. And now that I'm a Sunday guy, it's kind of tough to hope to learn to find out things during the week and then hope nobody else finds out before Sunday. And so I'm looking for different stuff, unique stuff, and I wait for that. But it's I enjoy the column, Billy, because I can write what I think is newsy, and people seem to like that. I must have a sense for news because and the format is good. You know, I can write short, long, whatever I think, whatever the news requires, and I'm on my own in terms of nobody tells me what to write. They did years ago, but now I'm on my own, and I like that, and then I go after the news, whatever it is.
You know, Charlie, many sports writers and columnists, they cross over and they've done television or they do radio, but you really have never done that.
No, I'm not interested
Why
in that.
not?
I'm a newspaper guy, that's all. Newspaper guys, newspaper people, to me, are to be read. I have no skill as a TV guy or a radio guy. I have no training in that, no background. I'm not interested in that. I'm just a newspaper. The sad thing is that our industry, newspapers are fading, the printed page and all that stuff, but at least we have the digital stuff going ahead now, and I think that's okay. But I've never been interested in the TV or radio stuff. Now, if it were highly paid stuff, you know, but I'm really not interested in that. I'm really content to have been a newspaper guy.
Is there a sporting event or sport itself? I know you played baseball and you played basketball as a youth, and then you played in the big leagues. But is there an event that gets you really excited to attend that you can't wait to get there?
Yeah, it's the Masters that we just got to see. I love golf. I'm not, as you guys know, I'm not any good at it, but I love to play. and I like to practice, and I'm always working on a new move and all that stuff. One of these days, my wife tells me, you guys know my wife, Paul, I like to hit balls more than anything else. And I'll go out and I'll spend an hour on the range, hour and a half, and I'll come home and I'll say, she'll say, how'd it go? And I said, not too good. I'm still working on stuff. And she'll say, point her finger at me, and she'll say, you know, nobody ever worked as hard at something and got as little out as you do with this golf. But I do love the stuff we've got. You know, the Hollis Cavner had the seniors up here for a year, 20-some years. That was fun to cover. We got the that KPMG women's major coming here in June. We got Hollis's Kavner's 3M Open, Mickelson and the gang. You know, Brooks Koepka and that, and they're trying to get Tiger Woods. I love covering that stuff. We had the Ryder Cup, but alongside with that, yeah, our daily or regular daily, whatever I need to do, trips to the ballpark. You know, I get to see Patrick operate out there. I mean, I love the Twins, and I love covering the Twins and being around the ballpark. Those are the major things. I mean, the other stuff is fun. This is a fun career. This newspaper business. It's just really, really fun, and I'm fortunate to be able to have done it. But those are my favorites: golf and baseball, or baseball and golf.
And Charlie, speaking of golf, a viewer from St. Paul wants to know who has more hole-in-ones, you or your wife?
Well, that's pretty good. Paula is a 28 or 29 handicapper, and up until last year had scored 4 holes in one in 4 years, 1 each year. Now she's have to come, she didn't get one last year, and they're all legitimate holes in one, 2 in the Palm Springs and 2 at Southfield Country Club. And how does that happen? You know, there's somebody on I don't know if it was in the Masters or we were watching the other day, who scored his first hole in one. I don't know if that was Justin Thomas. I can't remember who it was.
Bryson DeChambeau.
Bryson DeChambeau. Yeah. Good, Patrick. And I mean, and my wife Paula has scored 4 of them, so that's pretty that's pretty terrific. And they're all, you know, the 100 whatever,
how
30,
many you have?
20. I have 2. Which is the rarity. But how about you?
I have none.
How about Patrick?
I have 1.
Yeah, there you go. So, but that's a thrill too. That's fun. It's a fun deal.
We only have about 40 seconds, Charlie. Your nickname, as I said from the outset, they call you the shooter. Can you explain in about 30 seconds how you got the nickname?
It was in spring training in 1969, Orlando, Florida, Tinker Field, pitching against, the first guy I faced was Al Kaline. Blew him away with 3 strikes, struck him out. Willie Stargell, Hall of Famer, struck him out. I was throwing real hard in spring training. Billy loved it. My good buddy Bob Allison started coming up to me in the locker room and said, in the clubhouse, and said, "You are the big shooter." And he'd keep screaming that stuff. Arnold Gaethel was a sports editor covering the Twins then, and he started writing the big shooter, and that's what happened. Went from shooter to shooty to shoots and all that stuff.
Well, we're thrilled to have the shooter on Behind the Game.
Well, the shooter is thrilled to be with you two guys. 2 of the best guys in the business, sports business, are you 2 guys. So thanks for having me.
Thanks so
you.
much,
It's
Charlie.
been fun. Okay.
And thank you for watching. We'll see you next time on the next episode of Behind the Game.